Hello, my name is Federica Guglielmo. I am a social anthropologist in the vector biology department at the Liverpool School of Tropical Medicine, where I also serve as an ethics committee member. The GLOW organizing committee kindly invited me to discuss some of the most recurrent issues in ethics protocols and research proposals. What I most frequently see is a lack of understanding of the power inequality between the team of researchers, including interpreters, field workers, technicians, and the large part of the population we intend to study. Power inequality is systemic. It affects relationships between institutions and between senior and junior members of staff. It becomes even more evident in the relationship between researchers and participants, in the way researchers think of their participants and how they represent them in their research outputs. The lack of consideration for the complexity and the historicity of power differential surfaces in the study methods and reflects in two interlinked instances. The first concerns the process of obtaining consent. Participants are seldom given the time to consider whether they want to take part in the research. Information sheets contain jargon and explain procedures with which the most vulnerable participants, meaning the very ones we ought to protect, might not be familiar. This is a sign that the researchers deem of minor importance the participants' right to question, critique, and fully understand the study. In the second instance, I see disregard of context and of the positionality of the researcher and the prospective participants and how this affects the procedure of acquiring consent. How many of our research participants feel the pressure of our urban upbringing or the names of the powerful institutions that support the study, or even just our penmanship and note-taking. In a different context, with different actors, the same characteristics could foster a sense of security and reliability, but this is not a reaction that can be taken for granted. I look forward to the day when our scientists from all disciplinary backgrounds will be trained the responsibility of addressing these delicate balances. Thank you.
Okay, great. So hello everybody, and I hope you're enjoying all the different components of the GLOW conference that's happening at the moment. So my name is Clara Burton and I am a Programme Manager at the Liverpool School of Tropical Medicine. And over to you, Primrose.
Hello everybody, I'm Primrose Matamba-Nadzo and I'm the Programme Director for the Key Populations Programme at SESHA in Zimbabwe.
Excellent. So today we are chatting a little bit about some of the challenges that programme managers sometimes face with academics when we are managing implementation programmes. So just to get a bit of a background on both of us, Primrose, do you want to just introduce briefly what your role is?
So I oversee the implementation of the Sex Work Programme, and that's a national programme under the Ministry of Health. And we run out of 57 clinic sites nationwide, and we serve with a comprehensive sexual and reproductive health program for sex workers that we reach about between 26 and 28,000 sex workers each year.
Okay, excellent. And so I, as a program manager, I manage a research program that is essentially evaluating some of the work that that's Primrose has just mentioned there. So really probably to kind of start with to say is that, you know, both myself and Primrose, when we've been discussing this, you know, we get on very well with the academics in our lives, and we have really good working relationships with them. But there is a balance to be struck around, you know, the breadth and depth of the research kind of versus the milestones of a program and things that have to be done, and some of the, you know, the requirements that we have of, say, of some of our funders. Is that fair? Would you agree with that, Primrose?
Definitely, I agree. From From the program management side, although we're valuing the academics and the research, my focus is always, we have a project to implement. We've agreed on what we will do, within what timeframes, how we're going to track our performance, and we want to get the job done, and we want to get it done as quickly as possible and as well as possible, and that's what we're interested in.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. So I guess really it is, it's really up to the kind of the program manager and the researcher to work together to demonstrate what the research is telling us, but also how it can improve our existing, but also our future programs.
Yeah, it really is. We need to demonstrate that there's value in the research that gets done, because always from the program, we want evidence to base our adaptations and innovations in the work on. But we also have undertakings we have to stakeholders, to donors, that we need to strike that difficult balance. We can't miss certain scale-up timelines waiting for the research to be completed, even though the findings from the research are important. And in terms of the sex work program, the way we've always scaled up since its inception in 2009 has been based on what the research tells us about what works and what doesn't. And that helps that we no longer have this one-size-fits-all model of the sex work program. We've got adaptations and modifications that we've made based on the research. Recently, there was some work on microplanning and self-help groups that were piloted in Harare. That's helped inform how we're now implementing that at more remote sites where it would be difficult to do without the knowledge of what works well that we have now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's that's a really nice way to end this very kind of short podcast is, when the implementation and the research comes together and really improves the programs that we're working on.
Yeah, that works well when they can meet together without too much friction. That definitely works well.
Yeah, brilliant. Okay, well, thank you, everyone. That was just a short insight into the day-to-day challenges, but also the really the great outcomes that we have in our programs as well. Thanks, Purpose.
Bye.
Global Health Research Challenges. Greetings to the panel members and all present at the 2020 GLOW Conference. It is my pleasure and honor to contribute to this session on global health research. Global Health needs a working group of international organizations. This brings along like-minded people to discuss their work, learn from others, and forge new partnerships, resulting in fruitful collaborations as evident from publications with multiple international authorship. What is the basis for a successful collaboration? I think the key is the research question. The research question should have a local importance. It should be a priority for the people, the providers, and the policy makers. Besides, it should also be globally relevant. Where there are questions about the quality of care, women's satisfaction with the care, and the needs from the women's point of view, we need to overcome cultural and language barriers. Understanding the nuances of the spoken word is important. Interpretation of such study results should be done carefully. The most challenging aspect of international collaboration is the approval process. This goes through bureaucratic and regulatory processes. This is time-consuming and demanding. It is helpful to know the requirements of all the regulatory bodies. Communication, sharing of files, and data management is not difficult. In fact, the ease of multiple communication and data sharing options has brought down the barriers of time and distance. In my experience, political ideologies and cultural diversity has never been a barrier. Team diversity has been found to improve the quality of the work. New ideas come when you interact with people from diverse backgrounds. You think about things in a different way. You live in a global world where we want to be able to think more broadly. We can't do that without international collaboration. Wishing you all good health. Thank you.
My name is Lucy Nyaga. I am the country director, Liverpool School for Tropical Medicine in Kenya. I'm going to speak about implementing research from a program management perspective. I will specifically focus on conducting COVID-19 research within the context of a maternal and newborn program Liverpool School of Tropical Medicine is implementing in Kenya. Recognizing that COVID-19 will impact on overall program management and its outcomes, we appreciated the fact that the actual impact of COVID-19 on maternal and newborn health outcomes can be most objectively determined through conducting research. We therefore mobilized program stakeholders, including our donor, DFID, the Ministry of Health, both at national and subnational level. We also mobilized health workers in the facilities around the country and other maternal and newborn health partners working around the country. This was with the aim of getting their buy-in for the research, and the research is basically to determine the impact of COVID-19 on maternal and newborn health outcomes in Kenya. However, along the way, we have had to deal with a myriad of issues, including realigning program work plan and resources to accommodate the research, coordination of stakeholders, ethical approvals, among other factors. Based on the above, and from a program management perspective, we have learned the need for flexibility and the need to provide contingencies for aspects that were not originally foreseen during program design stage.
Hi, my name is Eunice Ngonda, the Finance Manager of LSTM Nairobi office, and sharing from my financial management perspective the challenges that I experience when it comes to implementing research in this local context is really helping the team understand that they are budget and a budget that has limits to that fact. And this is a challenge that presents itself in various scenarios almost every other day, and is helping the team understand that discussions sometimes have to happen, approval levels have to be observed if the environment has changed and we have to adjust the program in a certain manner, and also creating an environment for the team to be able to even come up with solutions themselves that can allow the program objectives to be fulfilled, to fit within the environment that is changing, but still fitting within the budget limits. I mean, looking at the scenario that has presented itself in the whole world, and that is COVID-19. This is a pandemic that no one had seen, but seeing that we can be able to change from face-to-face trainings to virtual meetings, supporting the participants with airtime, I mean, that was a good way of really adjusting, but still observing the budget limitations. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'm James Ditai, a full-time off-site PhD student at the University of Liverpool, but based in Uganda. I have had interesting challenges in my PhD journey, but I will speak only about two. That is delays from ethics approvals in Uganda and the impact of COVID-19 restrictions on my studies. This is my story. In November 2017, I registered for a full-time off-site PhD fellowship in women's health at the University of Liverpool. Towards the end of my first year, I submitted my application to Makerere University Research Ethics Committee in Uganda for ethics review and clearance. It took exactly 5 months for the REC to invite me for oral presentation, even after constant follow-up. At this point, I was away for the annual on-site visit at the University of Liverpool. A virtual meeting via Zoom was arranged, but this did not work out well with the ethics committee due to poor internet connectivity in their meeting room. A month later, I returned to Uganda to follow up the REC application in person. There was no form of feedback for me, even after 3 proper months after the REC meeting. How I overcame this ethics hurdle was I simply submitted the application, the same application, to another REC. And within a rapid turnaround time of 4 months, I had all full ethics and register approvals in the country. That means I had permission to start data collection for all my 3 separate PhD studies on the Ugandan land. However, it turned out that all these studies could never start without the sponsorship permission to proceed, in this case from the University of Liverpool. I waited for another 5 months passed by before I was offered sponsorship permission to proceed for the first 2 studies at the end of my second year. For the 3rd study, I'm still waiting for the sponsor's permission. With joy, I launched the first study within the first 1 month of my year 3. In my 3rd month of year 3, I launched the initial survey of the first study, listing what questions matters to the lay public regarding pregnancy, childbirth, and newborn health in rural Uganda. But in the 5th month of my year 3, specifically on the 21st March 2020, I suddenly stopped all the recruitment due to the country's total lockdown following the COVID-19 pandemic in Uganda. After 1 month into the total lockdown, it was lifted to a partial lockdown, but with no permission to conduct research involving face-to-face interaction with human subjects. At this time, I desperately needed to complete recruitment in this phase of the study. What did I do? At exactly 1.5 months into COVID, I initiated a phone call-based informed consent process. I called the potential participants via phones, audio recording the informed consent process, and all those who accepted to participate in the study were recruited up to end. I also prepared and submitted 2 manuscripts for publication as study protocols. I started to collate and analyze the initial survey data in preparation for the steering group meeting, which has not yet occurred. So my story provides true life story for any full-time student whose research might only start in year 3 of the PhD journey. It also proposes a model for informed consent during COVID-19 or future pandemic that call for restrictions of no face-to-face interaction with human subjects.
Thank you. So we heard from very many different people there about their own perspectives on the challenges in real-world research, varying from keeping within the budget to satisfying the funders and many other aspects besides. So I'm just going to turn to Charles and Helen and Joe now and ask you a few questions, and we'll have a discussion about this. Maybe you've all done a lot of research over quite a number of years. What would you say were the greatest real challenges that you faced in doing your research? Perhaps we'll start with Helen.
Yeah, I think first of all, I think doing global health research it's been extremely enjoyable. The journey, I think, has been very rewarding. But as you say, there are challenges along the way. And probably I'll start with the first presentation that we heard about the participants' empowerment. Certainly, when I ventured into research, both in Kenya and the Gambia, when I started out over 10 years ago, I think one of the key challenges was, trying to see how, especially women in rural communities, to what extent do they actually understand the research information that we are giving them, because they're already so disempowered. And obviously that kind of like the power dynamics there between the researcher, and even when you have your field team there, sometimes there's still the power dynamics, because your research team will probably be a lot more educated than the participants who like to recruit and study within your research. So I guess it's, for me, one of the really, really important things is, I guess, the thing around community engagement. And that goes beyond just, telling the community about what you're going to do, but actually ensuring that you're tailoring your participant information sheet and the information that you're asking your team to deliver to the participants to a level that they can understand, to ensure that actually there's real buy-in into your research project, so that they benefit, they feel there's some benefit from it. Sometimes there's not always that direct benefit, but I think it's ever so important that they feel part of it, and it's not just something that's brought to them, to be done to them. Yeah, I think that's, for me, is one of the key challenges. Mm-hmm.
Have you been able to bring back the results of your research to those communities when you finished?
Yes, so I think the opportunities are not always there, especially when you're a student and you're just there for a short period of time. But the opportunities that I've had to actually go back and rediscuss it with the community, it's been great. The question is always, okay, so then what happens next? So they're always very keen to continue engaging. But I think the key thing is how your starting point, how you actually introduce that project, you and your team, how you introduce yourselves to that community, and the way in which your work is conducted throughout the process. Yeah.
Jo, I know this is something that you've been feeling strongly about yourself, and the issue of equity in global health women's research. Would you like to address that point?
Yeah, I guess that, yes, we need to, when we design research studies, when we think about who we include as participants, who we include as the researchers. Am I repeating myself? Have you got an echo there from me?
No, you're fine.
Okay, all right, sorry, it's just my computer then, sorry. So I think, yeah, so equity is obviously very important, and it's part of who you include as participants, who you include as researchers, and ensuring that we do that. We've got equity in that, but equity in partnerships as well. So I think that's a key thing, is when we develop research studies, that we're doing it in sort of collaborative partnerships with different people, and that we're developing that research together. So whether that's including, the key beneficiaries of the research, so the women, the families that this research is supposed to support, including them in the kind of the development of the research, if at all possible. So, and also people like the policymakers and the practitioners, so the people who are going to use the findings of the research to change their practice or change policies, trying to include them in developing the research right from the word go, so that we're including that important element, so that when we do the research and we've got our findings, we're really excited about them, people will listen to that. They'll take, as being part of that research, they're more likely to listen to those findings and actually use them, really. So that's my point there. Mm-hmm.
Thank you very much. Charles, what do you think about how we can improve equity in our global research?
Thank you for that very important, very good question. And I really like all the testimonies that came from all the previous speakers. It is very important to think about equity right from the time you design the study. Gender equity, the involvement of local institutions, institutions in the Global South, and researchers from those institutions, within those studies. It is important to think about this upfront. Even before you start data collection, think about the research outputs. There are going to be X number of publications, who is first author, who is last author, and having all the various partner institutions amply represented. This is quite important. You don't want to get to the end of the line and then, there's a squabble for who's been listed on the paper or not. And at times it happens where, you take things for granted. You overplay your positionality as coming from the north. You feel quite important and superior to the rest of the team. You go ahead and submit a publication with or without their names, and then it throws up a huge disagreement in that relationship. So this is quite very important. Some partners, they may not be researchers, but they're part of that implementation process, maybe sitting at the technical level, at the Ministry of Health level, but they're also interested. They have been part of the process, and they're also interested in the research output. But you've involved them in everything, in design, in dissemination, meetings, and all of that, but then you produce an academic output, and there's no discussion with them, and you exclude them. Typically, it will backfire. So there needs to be that open and transparent discussion. There needs to be the need to make sure there's gender balance, to have ample representation of all the partners and the outputs of that research.
Thank you. So, yeah, great to be as inclusive as possible throughout the whole, from start to finish of the process. Perhaps just going back to the start of the process and about who chooses the research questions in the first place, and how do we know that the research questions that we might have in our minds are going to be of benefit to the people in the countries where we're working? I don't know, Helen, if you've got any thoughts on that.
Yeah, I think, when we've talked about building capacity, so, I'm from Sub-Saharan Africa, so it's about building capacity in Sub-Saharan Africa. And, at the moment, there are very many active researchers in Sub-Saharan Africa. And sometimes I guess one of the greatest challenges is trying to access funding to do their research. I think Professor Weiswa has just mentioned that in the previous session, that sometimes they have the research questions, but there isn't the funding there to actually do the research. So I guess in terms of developing the research questions, I think, certainly there's the need for partnership, because I think partnerships that are mutually beneficial. And, as we're discussing yesterday, when Professor Sally Theobald said, the people who actually live and work in those environments, they know what the real need is. And sometimes all they need is just to kind of revise and refine the research questions so that, they can be, they can put it, you can, develop a really strong research proposal through that. But, I think it's very much, I personally feel it's very much an issue of let people in the global south, where the needs are, come up with the initial research questions, and then maybe we can co-develop them and support them.
Thank you. I remember thinking back to when I was a medical student, we didn't get really taught very much about research methods from the point of view of being young researchers at all. And I think that perhaps is still an issue sometimes in many places. Charles, I wondered if you'd like to address this question about real capacity building for young researchers, and even starting from the student level upwards in the global context.
So I think, in my experience, there are opportunities for building capacity of colleagues, junior, less experienced researchers in the global south, that comes through the various grant applications. In fact, it is mandatory in some of those applications that you put in a plan for capacity strengthening. And there lies the opportunity, working with other senior members of that institution, to identify, the research needs of that team, and having a transparent process to actually identify, those team members that will benefit from those, capacity strengthening initiatives. But then as well, incorporating capacity building to keep such process going even after the project. So building that capacity within the senior faculty members in that institution to continue rolling it out as part of a program, and then you have a real sustainable approach.
Thank you. Thank you. Joe, I wonder if I can bring... Is Joe still with us?
Yes, I am.
Hi. Joe, I've just had a question come in that's really interesting. I'll read it out to you. It's about the COVID research. It says, do you personally feel that this challenging of resources and funding on COVID-related research risks overlooking other research strains and projects now and in the future? And do you think that researchers should raise attention on this issue? I've just had a question come in that's really interesting. I'll read it out to you. Did you hear me, Joe? COVID research. It says, do you personally feel that this challenging of resources and funding on COVID-related research? Did you hear the question, Joe? Sorry.
I heard a bit of it, and then I had a repeat of it.
Oh, sorry. So it's really about the, research funds being channeled into COVID research, and is this detrimental to the other research strands that are very important still? And are we going to overlook other things that are important in research because of this overwhelming tide of COVID research? And how should we, and perhaps not just COVID, but other things that are kind of the mood of the moment, and how do we maintain our priorities in the things that matter and take on board these new challenges at the same time?
Yes, I agree with the statement that there is a huge sway of funding going towards COVID-19 research, which some of it is obviously very necessary and very important, but obviously there is a finite pot of money for research, so other areas are going to be neglected because of that. And of course, those things aren't going away, are they? So maternal mortality, morbidity, neonatal mortality and morbidity aren't going. They're probably increasing as we speak because of the access and utilization of services. So, yeah, I think there's a real challenge and a real problem. And it's not just in research, but it's in service delivery as well, and provision of all sorts of services. So I think we do need to take a step back. I think there is something, about COVID-19, about its being a shock to health systems. And the research that we can do about that can maybe help us be able to manage future shocks on health systems, whether they're another pandemic or whether they're an earthquake or whether they're a conflict or other shocks as well. So I think there's an opportunity to learn from the COVID-19 research for other shocks and ways of making health systems resilient to be able to manage those shocks in the future. So I think that we need to look at it like that because as well. But at the same time, I think we still need to do the research on other areas that are important and relevant to different countries and different contexts across the globe. Thanks.
Thank you. Charles, I've watched you over the last several years balancing all the tensions between funders, deliverables, research questions, ministries of health and so on. Perhaps you could address that issue that Eunice alluded to in the film as well, a bit about the challenge between the funding and making sure that we keep to timescales when we meet challenges like James spoke about the delays with ethics and so on.
Yes, so I think it's a delicate, fine balancing act, dealing with all these key stakeholders. You've applied for a grant, you've got a grant from the funder. Maybe when you were developing that proposal, the lead stakeholder in the Ministry of Health was different from the person who's there now after you've got the grant. So there's already, a different understanding of what this is going to be all about. It probably has come with a different understanding of what these funds can be used for and what they cannot be used for. So there's that tension every time to be really clear. So you need to be clear, transparent upfront to say, what these funds are used for and what they cannot be used for, and what is the role of the partners, the Ministry of Health, in doing this. And there's a similar tension as well with funders. So I've had experience, with a major donor where the officer who was looking after this program had to leave and somebody else took over this program. And, you know, the person who is taking over, you know, wants things to be done slightly differently from what was, what had been agreed, up to the point of almost going back to, you know, taking out some big chunks of the proposal and putting something else. And you wonder, is this not the same institution we're dealing with here? So it can be very frustrating. But I think, you know, really remaining calm, you know, deliberate and clear, you know, in what you're doing, you know, documenting these things, because then you will have, you know, what to be able to show. For partners like Ministry of Health, you know, they really want to see what is the impact for our community, for the Ministry of Health. And so they need to be, you know, a part of that process. And once they begin to see the product, as it were, you know, they sort of value it the more, and those tensions sort of, you know, cease. So I think very good communication. It's very important with all. Documenting things, be quite clear, you know, in terms of what you want to do. And, you know, if something goes wrong with the funder, you know, you're quite clear, well, this has gone wrong, but this is what we've learned, and this is what we are proposing. So you need to go with a problem as well with a solution that is logical. And, you know, typically, you know, you can make progress.
Thank you. Helen, have you got anything to add to that?
No, I think it's, I guess, going back to one of the presentations, the fact about empowering the teams that you're working with. So I guess they're often, especially if you're a researcher here, based here in the UK, and you've got a team who are really supporting you to, you know, undertake this research project and deliver on the various deliverables. It's empowering them to find solutions, and they will. And I guess, you know, sometimes when you have a very paternalistic approach in terms of how you want your research to be conducted, because obviously often the funding will come from you know, from the West, then it becomes more difficult for teams to learn, to grow through that process. And I guess when we're talking about capacity building, it's building capacity in terms of allowing people to grow through those processes, so that for the next research project that they're involved in, they're probably going to be taken on at a more senior level, and eventually they'll actually be able to work and develop their own research questions, or, you know, manage their own projects. So I think it's really going back to the issue of equity, and just ensuring that actually we're being very open and transparent about that process.
Thank you. So I'd just like to ask you all a question that's perhaps a little bit more personal in terms of your own research journey. I'm sure we've got quite a number of people listening who are early stage researchers, and maybe Joe, I could ask you to talk us through and think about your younger self when you were starting out as a researcher. What advice would you give yourself with hindsight now in terms of if you were starting out all over again as a new researcher in women's health?
So I'm just thinking about my first research project that I did in China on maternal health and postnatal practices in the postnatal period, so sort of traditional practices. So it was for my master's study. It was the first ever piece of research that I ever did. And I was so enthusiastic and so driven by that I kind of steamrollered my way over everybody I saw, really. And I'd say that that's not a good way to do it at all. I think it's understanding the context in which you're doing the research, respecting differences, different ways of working, different ways of seeing the world, different ways of doing things, and trying to sort of work collaboratively to do it. I mean, I think I got to the end of that research project and I was much better at it, but I kind of, you know, had made all those sort of mistakes there. And I think, you know, now looking back at it, I think, yeah, Joe, you were too sort of hard-working in a way. And that's a bit of a strange thing to say when you're doing research, because research is hard work and you have to be diligent and rigorous, etc. But there's a balance with that, a balance about communicating with people, balance of the amount of work you expect from other people within the research team, understanding the incentives, what motivates people to be part of research, and understanding that so that you can really get, work well together and get the best out of it, really. So I think that for me has stayed very firmly in my head when I've moved forward, when I've been developing research programs since then, and more about the, developing equitable partnerships. I can talk about now recently in the last year, I'm leading a research program on health systems in fragile and shock-prone settings. And one of the first exercises that we've done as a consortium, so this is about 8 different partners, is really about our values as a partnership. What are our values? And it's a good place to start, because that's where you sort of try to understand what is it that make people work in research? How do we want this partnership to work? What's important to all of us? And things that we did in that exercise and things that came up were about open communication, respecting differences, trust in terms of budget, in terms of publications, Charles, all these different things, that are important and will be different across the partnership. So it's having that open and transparent conversation about that and trying to work together according to those values. Thanks.
Thank you, Jo. So Helen, what advice would you give to your younger self as a starting out researcher?
Yeah, I think, so I think my journey's been a little bit different. So I've had, experience of being an academic here in the UK, and in Sub-Saharan Africa as well. And I guess one of the key things is just not, I'm here because I haven't given up, but it's really understanding that actually sometimes those moments when you don't succeed in what you expect you'll succeed in are actually moments where it gives you time to grow, to learn new things, and it's an opportunity as opposed to a setback. So I think for me, in terms of giving myself advice, I would say when you get a no, when you get a rejection, it's an opportunity to go back and learn, regroup, and that the next time it will be better and you'll be in a better position to actually get something that would be right for you. So it's just really keeping going. You need a lot of resilience to remain in research, but also just ensure that you really value yourself as a person and that those rejections don't set you back.
Fantastic. And Charles, what would you say to that question?
Yes, I know they've both said a lot, but I mean, if I look back at my younger self in research, what I would have liked to have was a very good mentor, a very good sounding board, somebody who can help me to think and sort of map out my path, identify, those areas I want to grow it. We strategize, how I can get them, who I need to network with to be able to get those skills, and then, develop it in a more, structured way. But somehow we managed to do it the very hard way, which, I mean, for people who are new, I think first, identify that mentor who doesn't have, probably line management responsibilities over you, where you can really guide your career path to exactly help you think through, those areas that you need to grow in, how you need to build it, and who you need to work with to be able to develop those ones. Thank you.
Thank you so much. We're just coming to the end of this session now. We've had a final question about, teaching medical students about research methods and critical appraisal, and should we make this compulsory in the curriculum? Personally, I think yes, because the more we learn about evidence-based medicine from an early stage, the better. I don't have time to ask everybody else for that take on that question now, but thank you very much for joining this session, and I hope you found it interesting. We're just going to have a couple of minutes break, and then we're going to have our final session, which is all about how to run an online conference. our experience of learning very much on the hoof how to translate a conference that has always been a face-to-face conference within the United Kingdom to this amazing global event where we've had more than 1,300 people from 69 countries joining us. So I'm just going to call upon another panel now to come and take over and in a few minutes' time explain how they've managed to pull it off. And I think everybody's done it really well, but I'll leave that for the panel to address in a few minutes' time. So thank you.